Hey guys, tonight we will uncover one of the most horrifying mysteries of the Tudor dynasty, when Henry VIII believed that the white maggots crawling into the gangrenous wound on his leg were divine messengers, devouring his sins and whispering the kingdom's most secret conspiracies into his ear, while the court physicians recoiled in horror at the sight of those tiny creatures wriggling through the decaying flesh. They counted them as if cataloguing each message from heaven. He even claimed that the maggots revealed the court's most shocking secrets to him. And if you think this story is brutal enough to survive, just wait until you hear the 67th truth. You will not survive it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your local time zone. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Before diving into these horrifying mysteries, let us first sketch a few basic facts about the man behind the tumultuous Tudor dynasty, Henry VIII. Born on the 28th of June in the year 1491, was the second and only surviving son of Henry VII, the first king of the Tudor line, and Elizabeth of York. He was originally destined to serve as a spare heir to his elder brother Arthur, but fate propelled the young prince to the throne in the year 1509. At the age of 17, during his 38-year reign from the year 1509 to the year 1547, Henry VIII left an indelible mark on English history. Through multiple turning points, he established the Church of England, formally declared the monarch's supremacy over the church, and launched numerous costly military campaigns. In his personal life, Henry married 6 times, yet only 3 of his children survived to adulthood: Mary Tudor later, Queen Mary I; Elizabeth later, Queen Elizabeth I; and Edward VI. He also suffered the heartbreak of losing several other children in infancy. His relationship with his parents was complex. Henry VII was stern and cautious, while Elizabeth of York instilled in her son a profound pride in his royal lineage. Henry VIII's reign also bore significant cultural achievements. He patronized the arts, ushering the Renaissance into England, and laid the groundwork for the glorious Elizabethan era that would follow. However, few know that behind his image of power and splendor, Henry harbored a soul fraught with insecurity, an obsession with authority, and a vanity so ruthless it shocked even those closest to him. And now, let us uncover the lesser-known truths about this monarch, dark fragments that not only reveal his character, but also illuminate a dynasty steeped in tragedy. First up, fact the first. Henry VIII ruled his court by astrological superstition. Every major decision, from military campaigns to marriage selections and executions, was calculated according to celestial charts. Should an unfavorable forecast appear, the royal astrologer faced immediate beheading. The entire court lived in constant dread of not only the king's sword, but also the invisible stars above. Fact the second from his youth. Henry nourished an ambition to claim the throne after his brother Arthur's unexpected death in the year 1502. He had been merely the backup heir, unprepared for rulership, and the feeling of being a contingency plan etched a deep inferiority complex into his psyche. From that moment on, every move Henry made revolved around proving himself worthy of the crown, whether through cunning or brutality. Fact the third. He was obsessed not only with his intellect, but also with his physical form. Although he mastered 4 languages before the age of 10, what Henry prized most were his muscular calves. He frequently wore skin-tight clothing to flaunt his legs and forced courtiers, even foreign envoys, to lavish praise upon them. Anyone who dared glance without complimenting risked severe punishment. Fact the fourth. Henry kept a pack of savage hunting dogs and transformed them into instruments of torture. Innocent prisoners were bound as live bait, creating scenes of terror amid the royal hunts. The thunder of hooves on cobblestones and the dogs' savage howls served as dire warnings to any who dared defy the crown. Fact the fifth. In his teenage years, he composed a poem, likening himself to Hercules, extolling his own muscles and mythical exploits. The poem brimmed with erotic and violent imagery, and Henry compelled his officials to recite it aloud and shower him with adulation. Those who faltered, misread, hesitated, or lacked enthusiasm, found themselves swiftly punished, revealing that his delusion of grandeur had taken root early. These truths have begun to unveil the depth of power obsession and insecurity within a king thought invincible. But that is not the most shocking revelation. And now, steel yourself as we step into the next chilling truths. Now, when we have already laid bare the darkest facets of Henry VIII's soul, let us proceed to the next 5 facts, arranged in a new order to offer a different perspective. Right from the outset, fact: the 6th is not about astrological superstition or a lust for violence, but rather his addiction to drink. Henry VIII frequently indulged in what his guards concocted as potions, a mixture of raw beer, yeast, and fortified wine, strong enough to fell any horse. Yet through relentless self-training, he developed a horrific tolerance, remaining lucid and capable of issuing orders even when utterly intoxicated. His attendants were compelled to taste each cup first to check for poison, and many perished as a result. This drinking habit not only corroded his body but also fueled his paranoia, aggression, and utter loss of self-control, leaving the court on edge every time the king entered a feast. Next, we explore fact the 7th, an aspect that lurks behind the glamour of jousting and swordplay. Henry was so enamored with public spectacle that he turned every tilt-yard tournament into a nightmarish display. He did not merely seek victory, he demanded a breathtaking triumph that left his opponent too terrified to concede. His armor often shattered into jagged fragments, blood and hair raining down on his saddle like a reenacted Roman arena. Participants had only 2 choices: win just enough to avoid mockery, or win decisively and risk being accused of treason. This craving for extreme peril helped forge the ruthless king willing to shed blood to assert his power. Turning now to fact the 8th, a stark testament to boundless cruelty. Henry kept more than 70 hunting dogs, each named after a mythological beast: Cerberus, Hydra, Chimera, and so on. He did not regard them as pets, but trained them into living weapons. Innocent prisoners were bound as live bait and brought into the training grounds for the hounds to tear apart. This spectacle was staged openly in the palace courtyard, sending a shiver of terror through every courtier. By transforming defenseless animals into mass murder machines, Henry demonstrated that every life except his own was disposable entertainment. Moreover, fact the 9th reveals his most insidious weapon: handwriting. Henry's script was not simple penmanship, but a cryptic code more illegible than Latin itself. He deliberately embellished it with elaborate dots and flourishes to force his clerks to painstakingly decode each character and transcribe it. Any error, a misplaced dot or an errant loop, could cost the scribe his life. In this way, only the king fully understood his own orders, while anyone who misread them was eliminated, utterly stifling any chance of rebellion. Finally, we arrive at fact the 10th, a haunting revelation of his intrusion into private life. Henry recognized no boundary between public authority and personal privacy. He once disguised himself as a stranger to terrify Queen Catherine in her own bedchamber, leaving her sleepless for weeks. He would hide in wardrobes or behind tapestries to spy on his wives and courtiers, turning private chambers into ambush sites. This habit shows that Henry claimed ownership of every shadow of the palace, from the grand hall to the bedchamber. These 5 facts, rearranged and retold in a fresh sequence, fit together like shattered fragments to form a tragic portrait of a gifted yet insecure and merciless king. From lethal libations and savage jousts to packs of murderous hounds, weaponized handwriting, and the violation of private sanctuaries, Henry VIII emerges as a divine monarch whose cruelty knew no bounds. Fact 11: Henry VIII, built an extensive bedchamber espionage network that turned the most private corners of court into instruments of royal surveillance. Chambermaids, ladies-in-waiting, even senior attendants were coerced under threat of imprisonment or torture to report every nuance of daily life, the Queen's whispered conversations, the position in which she slept, and even the timing of her menstrual cycle. Those who hesitated or offered incomplete details were ruthlessly interrogated until they complied. By weaponizing the most intimate information, Henry ensured that no secret remained hidden. Every glance, every sigh, and every private exchange became a tool to maintain his iron grip on loyalty and fear. Fact 12. To avoid consummating his marriage to Anne of Cleves, Henry resorted to public defamation. He commissioned and circulated libelous letters throughout the court, falsely accusing her of chronic, malodorous breath. As a German princess with limited English, Anne found herself powerless to defend her reputation. Within days, whispered rumours had crystallized into official complaints. Her family's honour was besmirched, and her marriage was annulled. This smear campaign made it unmistakably clear in Henry's realm. Even a queen could be toppled by a rumour, and no subject, however, highborn could safely decline the king's favour. Fact 13. By his early 40s, Henry suffered from sexual impotence, a crisis that the court addressed only in hushed euphemisms. Western physicians tiptoed around the subject, speaking of nervous ailments, rather than naming the king's inability to perform. Yet the bedchamber failures fueled Henry's paranoia, convinced that hidden enemies had sapped his virility. He unleashed violent outbursts on his queens and their attendants. Intimate chambers, once places of trust, became stages for intimidation, where women endured both physical coercion and psychological torment, as the king strove to reclaim lost honour through brutality. Fact 14. Henry's wounded pride found a ruthless outlet in property seizure when a noblewoman spurned his diamond-laden overtures. He struck back without mercy. Her family's vast estates were confiscated on trumped-up charges of treason, and her elderly father was thrown into the Tower under vague accusations. The lands were swiftly redistributed to courtiers who demonstrated unwavering loyalty. This draconian response sent a stark message across England. To decline the monarch's desires even politely was to invite ruin. No amount of glittering gems could outshine the king's capacity for retribution. Fact 15. Frustrated by repeated illnesses and dubious medical advice, Henry turned to arcane elixirs concocted by his royal physicians. Gilded jars lined with exotic labels contained powdered rhinoceros horn, dried goat testicles, mandrake root, and dozens of rare herbs. Each morning, without hesitation, the king would gulp down these bitter brews, believing that a miracle cure lay hidden within their compounds. When the potions inevitably failed, Henry's faith in conventional medicine collapsed entirely, replaced by a blind reliance on supernatural remedies. His body weakened, his mind became more superstitious, and his court physicians, faced with both adulation and blame, walked a perilously thin line between life and death. Fact 16. Obsessed with the idea of purity, Henry mandated public virginity inspections for each new queen. Upon arrival à court, the bride, dressed in her finest robes, would be placed atop a raised dais in the Great Hall. Hand-picked court physicians then performed invasive examinations in full view of dukes, bishops, and ambassadors. The findings were proclaimed to the hushed assembly. Any hint of premarital impurity was labelled treasonous, branding the queen unworthy of her status and subjecting her to lifelong disgrace. These humiliating spectacles stripped every woman of personal dignity, reinforcing the message that under Henry's rule, a woman's body belonged to the crown, and her worth hinged solely on her ability to conform. By rearranging these 6 chilling facts, bedchamber spies, defamatory rumours, sexual impotence, diamond-fueled vengeance, alchemical elixirs, and public purity trials, we unveil a mosaic of obsession and absolute power. Henry VIII emerges not only as a transformative monarch, but also as a man consumed by fear, vanity, and cruelty, whose every whim could devastate both body and spirit. Fact 17. Catherine Howard first basked in Henry's extravagant praise. He lauded her as his unblemished rose, a compliment that spread through court like wildfire. Yet scarcely had that adoration echoed through the halls when his mood darkened irrevocably. In the span of a weekend, the same king who once showered her with silk and jewels decreed her execution to safeguard royal virtue. In Henry's world, devotion could harden into deadly contempt overnight, and tender flattery could devolve into the merciless stroke of an executioner's blade. Fact 18. Almost before the dust settled on Anne of Cleves's funeral bier, Henry had already pledged himself to Jane Seymour, her engagement announced within 24 hours of the burial. No interval for grief. No pause for reflection. Queens were swapped as swiftly as state documents when a male heir was at stake. That haste stripped marriage of all warmth, recasting each union as a calculated maneuver in his relentless quest for dynastic security rather than an alliance between two souls. Fact 19. Under Henry's edict, the Queen and all female attendants were forbidden to don any garment that hinted at their shape. Instead, they were enswathed in heavy brocades and layers so voluminous that movement became cumbersome. This was not intended as modesty's shield, but as a means of absolute bodily dominion. Every swathe of fabric was cut and fastened to conceal every curve, ensuring no man's glance could trespass. The resulting attire turned women into living canvases of royal prerogative, a quiet tyranny woven into every stitch. Fact 20. Modern scholars posit that Henry VIII may have contracted syphilis, a theory supported by the progressive decay of his health and the string of miscarriages and childbirth deaths suffered by his later wives. If true, this affliction would explain both his deteriorating vigor and his cruel insistence that queens produce healthy sons by potentially transmitting disease and then demanding progeny. Henry's behavior transcended cruelty, reducing his wives to unwitting vessels for dynastic ambition and treating their bodies as disposable instruments of lineage. Fact 21. Throughout his reign, Henry presided over the execution of an estimated 70,000 subjects, men and women condemned for religious dissent, political intrigue, or merely speaking the wrong word. In every shire and market town, rumour of the king's hangman travelled faster than the news of harvest yields. Under such a reign of terror, obedience was born not of loyalty or love, but of the desperate hope to escape the scaffold and retain one's breath and head. Fact 22. Among Henry's more grotesque innovations was execution by boiling. Those accused of poisoning were stripped, bound, and lowered into cauldrons filled with scalding water. The king himself often watched, remarking on each convulsion, as the victim's screams reverberated off dungeon walls. This method served as the ultimate spectacle, a visceral deterrent that seared into the collective memory the catastrophic cost of defiance. Fact 23. In his campaign to cement supremacy over the Church of England, Henry ordered the gruesome massacre of any clergy who persisted in papal allegiance. Priests were hanged, disemboweled, and quartered, their remains displayed as grim decorations in churchyards. On occasion, Henry attended his own banquets beside the coffins of these martyred clerics, treating their remains as trophies that underscored the futility of resisting his religious reforms. Fact 24. In his most paranoid decree, Henry outlawed any prophecy concerning the monarch's death. Astrologers or physicians who dared speculate on his lifespan faced charges of high treason and swift execution. Silenced and terrified, court intellectuals refrained even from broaching the topic of mortality, allowing the king to indulge in the fantasy of invincibility. This law not only stifled any realistic planning for succession, but also deepened Henry's self-delusion that he stood beyond the reach of disease and time. Fact 25. Instead of overseeing his wives' funerals with dignity, Henry transformed death into a grotesque carnival. He once climbed a battlement to observe Anne Boleyn's execution as though attending an entertainment. When her head dropped, he applauded and laughed, reducing a former queen to mere spectacle. In that moment, affection turned to sadism, and the blade's fall became his amusement. Fact 26. The king turned the highways into galleries of terror by displaying traitors' corpses on pikes for weeks. Their rotting bodies, swaying in the wind, filled the air with a nauseating stench that haunted townsfolk day and night. Even children treated the scene as playground scenery. Through this macabre warning system, Henry ensured that fear of public decay outweighed any thought of rebellion. Fact 27. Not even his most trusted circle was safe. Sir Thomas More, Henry's friend and confidant, was sentenced to death for refusing to endorse the king's marriage to Anne Boleyn. More's head fell as a stark reminder that loyalty counted for nothing in the face of royal decree. Friendship and scholarship were powerless when weighed against Henry's quest for unquestioned authority. Fact 28. Henry's matrimonial carousel bred perpetual dread. Having executed 2 queens by beheading, he kept 2 more in anxious suspense, awaiting the next false accusation, living beside the very scaffold that claimed their predecessors. Each consort endured daily psychological torment, listening at dawn for summons to the execution tower, knowing that a single rumour could trigger her downfall. Fact 29. After Anne Boleyn's death, her daughter Elizabeth was branded illegitimate and cast out from court, stripped of title and inheritance. The young princess spent her formative years in enforced obscurity, yet this exile forged her resilience. The sense of betrayal and abandonment by her father became the crucible in which England's future long-reigning monarch was tempered. Fact 30. Henry weaponized his beloved hunting hounds into engines of torture. During interrogations, he ordered prisoners to be thrown before these beasts, who were trained to maul flesh on command. The mere bark of the 4-legged squad sent suspects into paralyzing panic. In Henry's reign, even nature's creatures were conscripted into service of royal cruelty. Fact 31. Henry hosted grisly banquets at execution grounds. Treating each decapitation as a curated spectacle, he'd arrive with his table laid out, sampling meats and wines, while condemned prisoners knelt before him. After the axe fell, he'd critique the executioner's craftsmanship, the height of the swing, the velocity of the blade, the evenness of its edge, and even appraise the condemned's final utterances, judging their tone and diction as one would a prized actor's curtain call. Fact 32. In a stark display of delusional pride, Henry condemned a soldier to death for uttering the inescapable truth that the king shall one day perish. That simple acknowledgement of human mortality was taken as a grave affront to the monarch's vaunted eternity, and the hapless man instantly traded his head for having stated what every subject knew to be inevitable. Fact 33. The Queen of Cruelty extended to religious dissent. Women caught distributing Protestant tracts were tied to pyres and immolated while Henry feasted nearby. Flames licked their limbs as he waved away the smoke. Whistling his approval, their agonized screams echoed through the battlements. Yet he remained impassive, turning their charred remains into a public tableau of doctrinal enforcement. Fact 34. Henry maintained a ledger he dubbed the Register of Wrath, meticulously chronicling every individual he'd interrogated or executed. Each name was circled in sable ink and annotated with lurid accounts of torture, nail piercings, visceral disembowelments, the exact staging of death rituals. Courtiers lived in dread that a whispered rumour might inscribe them next, their fate sealed by a single entry in this morbid catalogue. Fact 35. Betrayal stalked Catherine Howard, despite the absence of concrete proof. Relying on hearsay alone, Henry ordered her arrest and execution, discarding any pretense of due process. The same woman he'd once hailed as his untouchable Rose was now branded a traitor, illustrating that under his reign, innocence offered no safeguard. Fact 36. Over time, Henry's once fit frame ballooned from a slender waist into an obese colossus, swelling from 32 to 54 inches. His mounting girth became the embodiment of insatiable appetite, both for food and for power. Each laboured step seemed to stoke his fury. His physical decline mirrored by an escalating fury that erupted in sudden, violent outbursts. Fact 37 court physicians kept meticulous records of the king's daily bowel movements, inspecting each specimen twice a day. Reports on colour, texture, and aroma arrived at Henry's table, with as much gravity as counsel on war or marriage. State decrees were sometimes postponed until the healers deemed his intestines balanced, transforming private bodily functions into instruments of royal policy and revealing the extent to which superstition and absolute power interwove at the heart of the Tudor court. Fact 38. The king's incessant perspiration led to excruciating skin eruptions beneath his arms and across his chest. His stiff, tightly laced doublets trapped moisture, leaving yellowed stains and intensifying a rank odour that clung to fabric and flesh alike. This unrelenting discomfort fueled Henry's volatile temper servants, who dared mention the itch or the scent risked his wrath, while courtiers tiptoed around him, wary of the next unexpected outburst triggered by his irritated skin. Fact 39. In lieu of genuine medical dressings, Henry's ulcered leg received golden-dipped cloths and animal fat poultices remedies chosen more for their opulence than efficacy. The wound festered, discharging foul-smelling pus that seeped through royal chambers. Instead of relief, the infection worsened, and wherever the king travelled, he left behind a pungent miasma, a visceral testament to the dangers of privilege when healing is sacrificed for pageantry. Fact 40. Even more dreaded than the ulcer's stench was the king's oral decay. Rotting teeth and a festering mouth infection forced everyone within earshot to pinch their noses during audiences. Henry insisted that daily doses of raw garlic would shield him from poison, but the result was a breath, so overwhelming it cleared rooms. His courtiers learned to stand back, delivering petitions at arm's length, and gauging their speech between shallow breaths. Fact 41. To counteract the relentless odours wafting from infected limbs, corrupted breath, and rancid flesh, the palace burned vast quantities of aromatic herbs and incense around the clock. Festoons of sage, juniper, and frankincense smouldered in braziers, filling corridors with a choking haze that mixed fragrance with fear. This ever-present fog reminded everyone that they dwelled in the shadow of a monarch whose afflictions required constant, oppressive intervention. Fact 42. By late rain. Henry's failing health left him reliant on a block and tackle crane to hoist him onto his stallion. The grand pageantry of horseback appearances gave way to a mechanical spectacle. Attendants struggled to slip him into the saddle. While Henry seethed at the contraption itself, he channeled his humiliation into cruelty, using his riding crop to prod frozen grooms and scratching the leather before them as punishment, ensuring that no one would forget how deeply the king resented the very machinery that sustained his power. Fact 43. Despite regal finery, Henry notoriously shunned bathing for months on end, convinced that water would open his pores to fatal contagion. Clothes went unworn and unwashed. Instead, court physicians prescribed austere poultices that did nothing to stem the grime. Soon, layers of dirt and sweat fused with his royal robes until they morphed into dull grey-black shrouds, exuding a rank stench so potent that courtiers crept past him, pinching their noses and stifling any murmur of protest. The odour became a silent terror in the palace, more feared than any political conspiracy. Fact 44. Henry's armour bore an exaggerated codpiece so grandiose it seemed a grotesque mockery of manhood. Tailors bound him into impeccably tight breastplates, elevating the forward projection to ostentatious extremes. Rather than convey virility, the oversized codpiece betrayed a monarch desperate to mask deep-seated doubts about his potency. Courtiers dared not smirk. They had to murmur approbation at the sight, lest their respect and perhaps their heads be called into question. Fact 45. As his health unravelled, the king resorted to wearing a fox fur diaper to manage incontinence, aggravated by his festering leg wounds. The sight of a once majestic sovereign perched upon his throne, clad in fur petticoat, turned solemn ceremonies into farcical pageants. Those entrusted with the diaper's removal swore oaths of silence, for any whisper of this indignity would have shattered the carefully constructed myth of regal dignity. Fact 46. The gangrenous ulcer on Henry's leg became a source of ceaseless torment. Weeping blood and foul-smelling pus into ragged bandages, each attempt to move sent jolts of agony coursing through him. In moments of unbearable pain, he erupted in furious tirades, cursing hapless courtiers, hurling goblets of wine at the walls, and demanding grovelling apologies. The court itself transformed into an inferno of dread, with ministers drenched in cold sweat, never certain when the next bout of wrath would strike. Fact 47. So overpowering was the odour of Henry's rotting dressings that during public audiences, courtiers would collapse mid-plea, overcome by the stench of festering bandages. To manage these embarrassments, royal physicians stationed recovery squads just outside the throne room. At a discreet signal, they would hastily usher the stricken noble through a side door, administer aromatic mouthwashes, and place perfumed charcoal between their teeth before returning them to the court, ensuring no whisper of the true cause reached rival factions. Fact 48. Even in death, the king's body defied decorum. After Henry VIII was sealed in his lead-lined coffin, decompositional gases built such pressure that the casket burst open with a violent crack, shattering wood and sending fragments of bone and shroud flying into the chapel. Scavenging dogs, drawn by the scent, descended on the scene, ripping at the remains as horrified mourners scattered in panic. This grotesque finale fueled rumours that the monarch could claim no eternal rest, a macabre coda to a reign marked by brutality. Fact 49. Henry's paranoia extended to the slightest bodily reflex he considered every sneeze a portent of divine will. Military campaigns were delayed, pardons granted, and schedules rewritten according to these involuntary expulsions. A sneeze at an inopportune moment could prompt the king to strip a noble of their title, or summon them for questioning a discreet euphemism for imprisonment. As a result, courtiers held handkerchiefs to their faces and stifled every tickle in their nostrils, convinced that a single ill-timed ACU could spell disgrace or death. Fact 50. By his later years, Henry maintained a covert council of astrologers whose readings outweighed the advice of ministers, from halting troop deployments to postponing royal weddings or executions. Every significant act awaited the alignment of stars and planets. Festivals were cancelled under a waning moon. New statutes were shelved until Jupiter occupied a favourable house. These astral vetoes earned the astrologers more real power than any lord or secretary, turning the king's court into a realm ruled by omens rather than reason. Fact 51. Deeply suspicious of the left hand, Henry deemed left-handedness a mark of diabolical influence. Anyone caught eating, drinking, or writing with their non-dominant hand risked accusations of sorcery. Records tell of left-handed servants and scribes dragged before the rack, tortured, and even executed to expel the evil within. At court functions, guests forced themselves to switch to their right hand, fearful that a single furtive gesture could brand them enemies of the crown and justify the harshest punishment. So we have just laid bare nearly 51 of Henry VIII's darkest facets, but this is only the beginning. In the chapters to come, many more secrets will make you shudder, surpassing every imagination of the brutality and madness of a king once thought invincible. Don't miss out. Click the subscribe button right now to be the first to uncover the next revelations, the most shocking and captivating videos our channel has prepared just for you. Fact 52. Under the guise of eradicating witchcraft, Henry targeted women skilled in herbal remedies and folk healing. These accused healers were paraded through the streets, subjected to public torture, and then immolated on blazing pyres in the town square. As the flames climbed, the king dined in close view, sipping wine while their shrieks echoed, transforming what he claimed was a purge of sorcery into a calculated political cleansing of dissent. Fact 53. The king's obsession with symbolic feasting led to sumptuous swan banquets, where courtiers were compelled to consume the regal birds on ornate gold and silver platters. Refusal to taste a single bite, or failing to finish one's portion, was read as a betrayal of loyalty, punished by exile or loss of rank. Thus, the sacred swan, once a creature of grace, became a sacrificial emblem, validating the monarch's absolute sovereignty. Fact 54. Henry's fixation on the hue of power demanded that he dress entirely in a precise shade of crimson. No other tone would suffice. His wardrobe overflowed with tunics, hose, and cloaks in every gradation of royal red, all subject to his exacting inspection. Any garment whose shade strayed even marginally from the standard earned its tailor instant dismissal, while the court itself became a sea of scarlet, reflecting the king's belief that colour alone could bestow supernatural might. Truth number 55. Each night, Henry insisted on stuffing his pillow with an ever-changing assortment of talismans, small vials of potion, pouches of powdered herbs, and strips of dried hide, believing they would shield him from evil spirits. Courtiers scrambled each dawn to collect the scattered charms and present them to the royal charm makers, who swapped shells for mirrors or monkey bones for crystals, according to the king's capricious whims. This nightly ritual not only sowed chaos within the inner court, but also drained the treasury with its endless parade of mystical trinkets. Truth number 56. In a unique form of linguistic tyranny, Henry outlawed the use of the word fat across the realm. Everyone from nobles to commoners was forced to adopt euphemisms, such as richly endowed or excessively meaty. Official decrets, poems, and even private letters underwent censorship to eliminate any mention of corpulence. Under this edict, language itself became a tool of oppression, with every synonym carefully policed to avoid offending the king's inflated pride. Truth number 57. To mask fear with feigned amusement, Henry mandated that all attendees erupt into laughter at his jests, even when the target was a condemned prisoner. He would quip about the criminal's neck worth a king's ransom, or jest about enemy tactics as the axe loomed. And courtiers had to execute a full-throated laughter exercise on cue. Those whose laughter faltered or sounded too hesitant found themselves under suspicion, facing threats of fines, harsher taxation, or outright punishment for their perceived disloyalty. Truth number 58. Amidst the brutal politics of court, jesters rose to unprecedented prominence and pay. These once discarded buffoons received incomes surpassing many lords, prized by Henry for their ability to provoke genuine merriment in a realm rife with betrayal. The king's conviction that only comedy could safeguard his spirit undercut the standing of his highest advisers. No policy or plea held more sway than the uproarious antics of the court's favoured fool. Truth number 59. Seizing the role of both playwright and hero, Henry personally orchestrated opulent pageants in which he starred as England's saviour. Every minister and noble was compelled to attend, rising to applaud thunderously at each staged victory. That orchestrated applause not only reinforced his self-image as a divine deliverer, but also rewrote collective memory history bent to the script penned by the king himself, obscuring the harsher truths of his reign. Truth number 60. Consumed by the mythos of Camelot, Henry commissioned an enormous round castle to emulate the legendary seat of King Arthur's Round Table. The project's massive walls, soaring towers, and grand arenas served no practical defense. They existed solely to validate his delusion of reincarnation. Henry inspected the site in full armour, demanding endless mystical enhancements, all while the kingdom's coffers drained and the labourers endured economic hardship to feed the monarch's chimerical ambitions. Fact 61. Henry proclaimed that heavenly beings descended before every battlefield display. He spoke of shimmering wings and celestial choirs echoing beyond the tournament grounds, a testament, he claimed, to divine favor. Whenever a knight prepared to strike his armoured shoulder, the king clasped his hands over his heart, closed his eyes, and announced that God himself endorsed his reign. Instead of inspiring confidence, such declarations chilled his court. If heavenly protection rendered him untouchable, who would dare challenge his will? Fact 62. The king wielded fire to suppress intellectual independence when he had all copies of Catherine Parr's theological writings seized, doused in oil, and incinerated at the palace gates. Her progressive commentaries and scriptural analyses turned to smoke before a silent crowd. The flames signified more than censorship. They signalled Henry's intolerance for a wife whose mind he deemed too free. Any expression of sympathy for her ideas risked being branded treasonous. Fact 63. Jane Seymour was posthumously elevated as Henry's true wife, in a gesture that read less like tribute and more like calculated repression. In declaring her beyond reproach immune from infidelity or dissent, he fashioned an ideal consort incapable of opposition. Courtiers recognized the bitter irony in death. She alone could never refuse or betray him, underscoring Henry's readiness to sacrifice life itself to secure unchallenged loyalty. Fact 64. In the very week Catherine Howard met her fate at the executioner's block, Henry threw a lavish court fete. Music swelled in the halls, and laughter rang out as nobles toasted between dances. Those mourning the fallen queen were compelled to don bright smiles and join the merriment. This juxtaposition of celebration against recent tragedy exposed the king's callous cunning by forcing joy upon grief. He transformed genuine sorrow into a spectacle of obedience. Fact 65. Henry manipulated legal edicts and geographic exile to break his queens. He dispatched them to remote fortresses battered by icy winds, meagre rations, and total solitude. There, under pre-written charges of disloyalty, they were coerced into signing annulment papers or renouncing their rights without any chance for defence. Each decree stripped them of status before a stunned realm, so that a single royal proclamation dissolved their marriages and dissolved their honour. Fact 66. All royal correspondence passed through a labyrinthine network of spies. Every letter the Queen sent or received was intercepted, read, and often redacted before the chief agent granted permission to proceed. Heartfelt words, "Be safe. I long for you," were deleted, lest they hint at forbidden alliances. Thus, private messages became instruments of control, and the Queen's pen was shackled by the omnipresent shadow of Henry's absolute surveillance. Fact 67. Henry employed a contrived trial of blood to convict Anne Boleyn of incest with her brother, George, extracted under brutal torture. Their confessions, though patently false, served as the legal veneer for their shared execution. The siblings ascended the scaffold together, Anne pleading for mercy before the blade fell. This spectacle taught the court that proximity to the throne offered no immunity. Any marshal's script could be rewritten overnight to condemn the innocent. Fact 68. His correspondence blended sacred reverence with disturbing sensuality. In letters to Anne of Cleves, Henry rhapsodized that divine lights had illuminated her calves, then luridly likened her form to a shrine of decaying flesh. Recipients of such missives found themselves caught between piety and repulsion, uncertain whether they stood before a monarch in prayer or a predator at the altar of his obsessions. Fact 69. In just 16 days following Jane Seymour's funeral rites, Henry annulled her memory and wed Anne of Cleves. That narrow window, barely enough to close mourning curtains, underscored a ruthless, calculous grief for Jane was mere protocol. Its duration dictated not by sorrow, but by the unceasing demand for a male heir. Fact 70. A noblewoman's refusal to yield her consent earned her pearls hurled into her face. As the expensive gems tumbled across marble floors, the offended king turned on his heel, reducing her dignity to a scatter of lustrous beads. By weaponizing luxury, he insisted that a single no could shatter a family's title and treasures. Fact 71. With the stroke of his pen, Henry ordered the dissolution of over 800 monasteries, diverting their vast coffers into royal hands. Thousands of monks faced execution or exile, and sacred libraries were ransacked. What he branded as spiritual reform was, in truth, a voracious plundering of ecclesiastical wealth that left once hallowed halls in ruin. Fact 72. Proclaiming himself supreme head of the Church of England, Henry subsumed spiritual authority beneath his crown. Clergy loyal to Rome faced treason charges, and even bishops knelt before the king to celebrate Mass. This fusion of secular and sacred power erased any boundary between state and church, transforming religious devotion into a forced oath of fealty. Fact 73. Henry's religious edicts ignited decades of sectarian bloodshed, pitting Catholic against Protestant in relentless uprisings, from martyrdom at the stake to clandestine exiles. Every atrocity bore his imprimatur. In England, faith became a perilous tightrope, protective for some, deadly for dissenters, leaving generations haunted by the memory of pious houses turned battlegrounds. Fact 74. While common folk survived on scant gruel and wild greens, Henry's later feasts featured a 6-course extravaganza comprised almost entirely of meat, 80% of every banquet. Honeyed dormice and roasted swans graced his table, celebrated as pinnacle delights. Rumours swirled of mussel-full day, when dormouse dishes were renamed in honour of his prodigious appetite, laying bare the chasm between royal abundance and widespread starvation. Fact 75. An ingenious yet indulgent device in Henry's private suite dispensed wine and spirits at the twist of a valve. This automated wine tap drained the royal treasury as freely as it filled goblets, enabling the king to fuel his binging without limit. Attendants found themselves doubling as bartenders and emotional handlers, tasked with steadying Henry's mood after each inebriated excess, lest a drunken tirade unleash fresh waves of terror across the court. Fact 76. In an act of ceremonial rigidity, Henry outlawed turning one's back on the sovereign. Courtiers approaching the throne learned a gliding advance that kept their bodies angled forward, faces respectfully bowed. A single inadvertent pivot was deemed treasonous, triggering back-turning trials that left more than one nobleman humiliated and injured. Every footstep in the palace became a delicate calculation to avoid a charge as absurd as it was deadly. Fact 77. Haunted by visions of infernal spectres stalking his reflection, the king outlawed mirrors in his realm. Surfaces once gleaming were draped or removed, leaving Henry unable to see his own face for months. This edict plunged him into profound isolation, awake in the dead of night, sweating. He would tap walls in vain hopes of finding a hidden looking-glass to prove his own existence, his paranoia echoing in every unreflected shadow. Fact 78. Convinced that raw garlic could fend off hidden plots, Henry insisted on daily cloves of the pungent bulb. The combination of garlic breath and the odour of his sore-riddled body turned every audience chamber into an olfactory trial. Courtiers resorted to muffling scents with embroidered sachets or hastily pinched nostrils, negotiating each royal meeting through a haze of repulsion and enforced politeness. Fact 79. In a grim testament to his wrath, Henry maintained a list of wrath, cataloguing hundreds deemed traitors. Each name was paired with a vividly described execution, flaming pyres, limb-by-limb dismemberment, or savage mauling by hounds. Courtiers entered audiences with hearts in their throats, exchanging terrified glances as they wondered which name might surface next. That ledger stood as a stark oracle on any restless night. Your name could summon the king's fury at dawn. Fact 80. Despite his close bond with Sir Thomas, More, celebrated author of Utopia, and once Lord Chancellor, Henry ordered More's execution when he refused to endorse the Act of Supremacy. Loyalty and learned defences of royal policy counted for nothing. The king's will prevailed, and More's head fell at Tower Hill, his dignified bow before a lifeless effigy, followed by the curt declaration that no one is above Tudor law, stands as an enduring testament to a court where hypocrisy and brutality reigned. Fact 81 law became Henry's personal instrument of power as he fabricated charges against his queen's incest. Witchcraft. Adultery, to eliminate those who no longer served his interests. Once the king's seal authenticated the accusation, trials were mere formalities en route to a foregone verdict. Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard learned that justice in Tudor England meant obeying the king's caprice or paying with one's life. Fact 82. In the wake of Anne Boleyn's downfall, her daughter Elizabeth suffered as collateral damage branded illegitimate, stripped of inheritance, and banished from court. Cast into loneliness and scorn, the young princess endured shame that could have broken her spirit. Instead, that very injustice steeled her resolve, forging the independence and fortitude that later defined her 45-year reign as the formidable Virgin Queen. Fact 83. To sharpen the nation's martial edge, Henry banned bowling, a favoured pastime, and enforced daily archery drills. The jovial gatherings on the green were outlawed, replaced by incessant target practice. By subordinating leisure to militaristic discipline, the king demonstrated his contempt for popular recreation, treating his subjects' cultural rituals as mere tools for reinforcing his martial agenda. Fact 84. On his deathbed, Henry whispered only the word monk. Monk? Monk? A haunting fragment of regret for the thousands of religious men he had dispatched to their deaths. That repeated plea suggests a final moment of contrition for ordering the dissolution of monasteries and the execution of clergy, an apology uttered too late to absolve the horrors his reign unleashed upon the faithful. Fact 85. Consumed by vanity. Henry could not abide losing, not even in sport. During a royal festival in France, he challenged the local wrestling champion and was defeated in his first bout. Incensed, he refused to speak to the French king for the remainder of his visit. Back in England, he erased all mention of the loss from official chronicles and demanded a rematch on his own terms. Through this denial of defeat, he elevated personal ego above fair competition, leaving no doubt that Henry placed his pride above the principles of sportsmanship. Fact 86. Convinced that felines were Satan's covert agents, Henry ordered any stray cat found near him to be executed or exiled, and locked his chamber's own cats in stark iron cages, white frames with black bars. At every plaintive meow, the king would erupt in fury, demanding to know which courtier was directing these demonic spies. The palace descended into chaos. Gentlewomen hid their companion cats under beds. Officials tiptoed around the barred enclosures, and all lived in dread of unseen, possessed creatures lurking about. Fact 87. In a display of absurd grandeur, Henry commissioned gold-embroidered, diamond-encrusted undergarments hidden beneath his robes, yet jealously guarded as state treasures. These gilded briefs, adorned with Tudor roses and roaring lions, were kept under glass in his private quarters. Before laundering, ladies-in-waiting had to kneel respectfully. Any mishandling risked royal displeasure. This ostentatious extravagance siphoned funds from the treasury and turned even the king's unmentionables into symbols of unchecked monarchical vanity. Fact 88. To perpetuate an image of virile dominance, Henry ordered his portrait on every penny, farthing, and noble to be sculpted with plump cheeks and a pronounced double chin despite his own health's rapid decline. These corpulent coins circulated far and wide, forcing subjects to glimpse his inflated visage at every market stall. Yet villagers whispered of shadowed hollows beneath his eyes and crow's feet etched into metal, betraying the frailty the portrait intended to conceal. No engraver dared defy the mandated likeness, for to do so courted the gallows. Fact 89. In a condemnatory pronouncement, the Pope branded Henry the most dangerous man in the world. This was more than rhetoric in defiance of Rome. Henry had persecuted Catholic faithful, dissolved monastic institutions, and coerced bishops into an oath to his crown. Any allegiance to the papacy deemed treason. The papal declaration forbade any devout Catholic from serving him, casting Henry as an international scourge whose religious policies sowed discord across Christendom. Fact 90 above all else. Henry's fanatical pursuit of a son shaped every alliance, edict, and campaign. Ironically, his ultimate successor was his daughter Elizabeth, once denounced as illegitimate and exiled, who ascended to the throne and reigned with wisdom and stability for 45 years. In underscoring her resilience, Elizabeth's triumph exposed Henry's gravest error, dismissing her potential. His despair over failing to produce a male heir faded before the enduring legacy of the monarch he once scorned. Fact 91. On his tomb, visitors encounter a stark confession rather than royal boasts. The simple epitaph reads, "Here lies Henry VIII, full of sin in this world." This unadorned admission of guilt etched in stone beside St. Philip, George's chapel, strips away any pretense of glory. After decades of despotism, the king's final statement acknowledges the hollowness of power and the weight of his own transgressions. Fact 92. Henry's grand sepulchre for Jane Seymour was never completed. Upon his death, the half-finished monument unjoined columns, partially laid floors, and only faintly carved reliefs stood abandoned. Today, moss-covered stones and rough masonry still mark the site, a silent testament to ambitions cut short and the futility of erecting monuments to secure eternal fame. Fact 93. Born a princess and branded a bastard after Anne Boleyn's downfall, Elizabeth spent her youth exiled and disenfranchised. Yet that same rejection forged her resilience, propelling her to ascend the throne and preside over 45 years of stability, cultural bloom, and naval dominance. The injustice that sought to erase her origins instead catalyzed one of England's most celebrated reigns. Fact 94. To ensure every subject trained with the longbow, Henry outlawed bowling greens, England's most beloved recreation. Lawns were levelled, and citizens dared not assemble for the simple pleasure of rolling a ball. In Henry's eyes, leisure carried no value unless it served martial preparedness, revealing his willingness to suppress popular pastimes in pursuit of military discipline. Fact 95. His whispered final words. Monk. Monk. Monk linger as a late-blooming penitence. As fever claimed him, the king murmured that single, repeated plea, suggesting remorse for the countless clergymen he had persecuted. Those 3 syllables echo through history as a belated reckoning with the religious bloodshed he had sanctioned. Fact 96. During a state visit to France, Henry challenged the realm's top wrestler and was unceremoniously thrown in the opening bout. Rather than accept defeat, he refused to meet the French monarch thereafter and ordered chroniclers to expunge any mention of the loss. Observers noted him clutching his padded doublet to hide bruises, proof that a single sporting defeat could wound his pride more deeply than any battlefield scar. Fact 97. Convinced that cats served as Satan's spies, Henry ordered any feline found roaming palace grounds seized, imprisoned, or put to death. The mere sound of a meow sent him into a rage, prompting frantic interrogations of his household staff. Courtiers stashed beloved pets beneath beds, and corridors echoed with anxious whispers. Every corner teemed with imagined demonic emissaries. Fact 98. He possessed radiant undergarments, lavishly adorned with gold filigree and glittering diamonds. Though hidden beneath his robes, these sumptuous briefs embroidered with Tudor roses and roaring lions were enshrined under glass in his private chamber. Each washing required his ladies-in-waiting to kneel in deference, exemplifying a vanity that depleted the treasury to adorn garments unseen by any but the king himself. Fact 99. Determined to project vitality, Henry redesigned every coin in circulation to feature his visage with exaggerated, plump cheeks and a pronounced double chin. Each penny and farthing bore that inflated portrait, ensuring every subject glimpsed his royal bearing. Yet villagers whispered of etched lines around the eyes and aged spots, quietly exposing the very infirmities the propaganda sought to conceal. Fact 100. In a historic rebuke, The Pope declared Henry the most dangerous man in the world. A verdict earned by his ruthless suppression of papal authority, dissolving monasteries, persecuting clergy, and compelling bishops to swear fealty. This papal denunciation barred faithful Catholics from serving him and cast the English king as a menace to Christendom, marking his reign with international infamy. Fact 101 above all else. Henry pursued a son to secure his dynasty. Yet fate crowned his discarded daughter Elizabeth, once labelled illegitimate, as his greatest heir. Exiled and deprived of her birthright, she later ascended to the throne and presided over a 45-year era of stability and cultural triumph. In her achievements shone the true legacy of the Tudor name. Surpassing any male successor the king had so feverishly sought. Having peeled back layer after layer of Henry's darkest secrets, revealing his paranoia, cruelties, and incredible obsessions across 101 chilling truths, we now turn our gaze to the most personal battleground of all his marriages. These unions were far more than private vows. They were the arenas in which Henry's ambitions clashed with affection, faith, and the desperate pursuit of a male heir. Each wife became a political pawn, a catalyst for religious upheaval, and, in many cases, a tragic victim of the king's insatiable drive. In this next chapter, we'll explore how these 6 marriages shaped Henry's reign and left an indelible mark on England's destiny. Henry VIII's 6 marriages read like chapters of a geopolitical thriller infused with personal drama. By examining each union, we see how matrimonial diplomacy, dynastic ambition, and crushing heartbreak defined both the man and his kingdom. Catherine of Aragon, originally wed to Henry's brother Arthur, became his first queen when Arthur died. Their 2-decade marriage was a model of loyalty and mutual respect, producing one surviving child. Mary yet frustrating Henry's relentless desire for a son. As Catherine aged without delivering a male heir, Henry wielded scripture to demand an annulment. Her steadfast refusal ignited England's rupture with Rome, birthing the Church of England. Their divorce exemplified how personal desires could trigger seismic religious and political change. Enter Anne Boleyn, whose intelligence and vivacity ensnared Henry's heart. Anne's refusal to be a mere consort led him to defy the Pope, install her as queen, and declare himself supreme head of the Church of England. But when Anne, too, failed to produce a male heir, and her outspoken nature clashed with court decorum, Henry's affection curdled to suspicion. Accusations of adultery and treason backed by forced confessions sealed her fate on the scaffold. Anne's rise and fall underscored the deadly intersection of personal ambition and royal prerogative. Seeking solace, Henry married Jane Seymour, whose gentle demeanour and devout piety offered stability. Jane finally bore him a son, Edward, securing the succession he had craved. Yet triumph turned tragic when she succumbed to postnatal complications mere days after Edward's birth. Henry's grief, profound and public, led him to declare Jane his true wife, and he chose to be buried beside her. Jane's brief reign as queen consort and untimely death reveal the human cost of dynastic pressure. The quest for political alliance drove the 4th marriage to Anne of Cleves, a union arranged to strengthen ties with a German principality. When Henry met his bride and declared her portrait misleading, the marriage was annulled after 6 months. Anne emerged with the unique title King's Sister, ample estates, and safe haven in England. Her survival testified to Henry's seldom exercised capacity for diplomatic generosity, even amid his notorious volatility. Then came Catherine Howard, whose youth and beauty rekindled Henry's passions. But the 16-year-old queen's indiscretions soon became fatal in a court unkind to transgression. Accused of infidelity, Catherine was swiftly executed. Her dramatic fall, echoing Anne Boleyn's fate, demonstrated that charm and flattery could not protect any wife from the capricious wrath of a king determined to control both heart and crown. Finally, Catherine Parr, twice widowed and wise beyond her years, became Henry's last wife. As his health and temper waned, Parr's intellect and gentle counsel provided comfort. She navigated theological tensions, nurtured Henry's children, and championed early Protestant reforms. After Henry's death, she continued to influence Mary and Elizabeth's education, laying groundwork for their future reigns. Across these 6 unions, 2 themes dominate. First, Henry's obsession with a male heir drove every decision from alliances and annulments to executions and religious schisms. His unrelenting pursuit of a son reshaped England's faith and governance. Second, Henry's willingness to weaponize law and scripture in service of personal desire precipitated the dissolution of monasteries, the establishment of royal supremacy over the church, and a cascade of Tudor reforms that reverberated for centuries. Yet amid political maneuvering lay profound human tragedy. Each queen navigated a court where favour could flip to fatal accusation. Henry himself oscillated between tenderness and terror, revealing a man torn between emotional longing and ruthless ambition. His marital odyssey ultimately forged the modern English state-fueling religious revolution, altering alliances, and producing 3 heirs who would each leave their own indelible mark on history. In the next installment, we will examine the lives and legacies of Henry's surviving children Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, each shaped by their father's turbulent reign and each destined to define the Tudor legacy in their own right. Having charted the tempest of Henry's marriages and the seismic religious and political shifts they provoked, we now turn to the next generation, the monarchs who inherited the Tudor legacy, born into a world shaped by their father's ambitions and betrayals. Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward each confronted the burdens of their lineage, and each would leave an indelible mark on England's destiny. Edward VI, born 1544, the long-awaited son and only male heir. Edward succeeded to the throne as a boy of 9. Instantly, his fragile body became the focal point of competing regents and religious factions. Under the Duke of Somerset's protectorate, Protestant reforms accelerated, Mass was curtailed, clergy married, and iconic shrines dismantled. Yet Somerset's rival, the Duke of Northumberland, soon seized influence, enforcing radical changes that outlawed Latin liturgy and promoted a prayer book more austere than Edward's. Despite Edward's keen intellect, he mastered Latin, Greek, and Hebrew by age 12. His health deteriorated rapidly. Tuberculosis claimed him at 15. Cutting short both his promise and the official shift toward Protestantism he had championed, Edward's brief reign left England poised on a religious knife edge. His premature death precipitating a succession crisis that nearly placed Lady Jane Grey on the throne. Mary I born, 1516, the eldest surviving child of Catherine of Aragon. Mary's early life was marred by her parents' bitter annulment and her subsequent illegitimacy. Restored to the succession under the Third Succession Act, she bristled at the Protestant reforms enacted by her half-brother. When Edward died, Mary boldly reclaimed her birthright, rallying support through impassioned proclamations and a narrow military campaign that deposed Northumberland's puppet. Her accession in 1553 marked England's return to Rome. Mary's pursuit of religious unity led to the restoration of papal authority, but also to the persecution of nearly 300 Protestants, earning her the sobriquet Bloody Mary. Yet Mary's reign also saw the revival of academic institutions and the strengthening of royal administration. Despite a disastrous marriage alliance with Philip II of Spain and her failure to produce an heir, Mary stabilized the monarchy and set the stage for her sister's more moderate rule. Elizabeth I, born 1533, cast out from court and labelled illegitimate after Anne Boleyn's fall. Elizabeth spent her adolescence under suspicion, her household walls echoing with whispered plots. Yet she emerged with a keen political instinct, navigating the treacherous waters of faction and faith. Proclaimed queen in 1558, Elizabeth faced immediate challenges: Mary's restored bishops, foreign threats, and economic distress. Her response, the Elizabethan settlement, crafted a middle road. She restored the monarch's supremacy over the Church of England while allowing a modicum of ceremonial form, forging a national church that outlasted her reign. Elizabeth's refusal to marry her virgin queen persona became a diplomatic tool, enticing suitors and delaying foreign entanglements. Under her rule, England triumphed over the Spanish Armada in 1588, saw the flourishing of Shakespeare and Marlowe, and expanded its reach through voyages to the New World. Her 45 years on the throne, the longest of any Tudor monarch, transformed England into a global power and inaugurated a cultural golden age. Collateral lines and lost children beyond the triumvirate. Henry and his queens suffered the heartbreak of child mortality. Several infants: Prince Henry, Duke of Cornwall, Elizabeth, Princess of Somerset, died within months. Each loss compounded the king's obsession with securing a legacy and deepened the court's anxieties about succession. These tragedies also humanized the Tudor drama, reminding contemporaries and posterity that royal birth offered no immunity from fate's cruelties. Dynastic legacy and lessons. The Tudor heirs illustrate the ironclad link between personal fate and national destiny. Edward's piety and youth invigorated Protestant zeal, but left a vulnerable throne. Mary's fervour restored Rome but alienated many. Elizabeth's pragmatism balanced faith and statecraft to forge enduring stability. Their diverse approaches to government, religion, and marriage underscore how Henry's turbulent legacy both constrained and inspired his children. As we reflect on these three reigns, we see the full arc of the Tudor age, from break with Rome to religious settlement, from dynastic bloodshed to cultural renaissance. Their combined legacies remind us that the true measure of power lies not only in might or law, but in the capacity to adapt, to reconcile, and ultimately to unite a kingdom long shaped by intrigue and ambition. And that, in full, is the sweeping portrait of the Tudor dynasty, from bloody, decisive actions to trampled lives and seismic religious and cultural turning points that ushered Western Europe into a new chapter of history. The nearly 1,500-year adventure of Henry VIII and his successors, spanning 6 marriages, 3 kings, 1 queen, and countless personal tragedies, leaves us with profound lessons. First, power and passion can blind us. Henry VIII was not only a formidable monarch with a sword, but also a failed husband, driving his wives into political trials, legal fates, and death. When absolute power fuels personal desire, principles of justice and compassion vanish. We learn that anyone, even an anointed one who allows passion to rule, risks losing themselves and inflicting suffering on many others. Second, politics and religion are forever entwined. The divorce from Catherine of Aragon was more than rejection of a devoted wife. It ignited the English Reformation. In Henry's hands, canon law became a personal tool to consolidate authority while sowing division. We recognize that any religious change, however born of private motives, can carry sweeping consequences, even societal upheaval that cannot simply be undone. Third, character and personal fate can determine a nation's destiny. The 3 heirs, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I, each bore their father's legacy in different ways. Young Edward shone a light on reform. Mary restored Roman Catholic faith, and Elizabeth reconciled both extremes to inaugurate the glorious Virgin Queen era. They show that even in the greatest chaos, individuals can choose either moderation or cruelty, thereby shaping history. Fourth, history holds both glory and darkness. Through over 100 chilling facts we've uncovered, Henry VIII stands as both the epitome of supreme authority and a symbol of absolute cruelty. This video does more than recount details. It invites a question. What lessons do we draw from the past? Do we side with those who pursue power blindly, Or do we stand for justice and compassion? Fifth, the value of remembrance and reflection. Revisiting Tudor history gives us a mirror for the present in any government, democratic or autocratic, when laws are captured by personal will. Social equity quickly falters. We see vividly why rule of law, transparency, and checks on power are essential. Sixth, the power of storytelling. By portraying Henry VIII through the lenses of marriage, authority, and personal life, we not only grasp the mechanics of his reign, but also find inspiration to reflect on ourselves and the great challenges we face. Each shattered marriage, each tragic queen, each heir who died young or ignited a golden age, reminds us that history is not a dry list of events, but the lives of people with the same desires, errors, and hopes as we have today. I hope this video has given you not only valuable insights into one of England's most astonishing kings, but also a deeper appreciation for staying vigilant against limitless ambition. If you found it helpful, please click like and share your thoughts below. Together, let us continue our journey through human history, choosing the lessons that will stand the test of time.